record the computer. Yeah. Welcome everyone on the Rapid Diffs Weekly. We have a single point on the agenda, which is actually quite important. So I was working on implementing new file viewers for Rapid Diffs, and I discovered that we are using duplicate IDs for code line sides. So we have parallel view, which uses left side and right side. And for each line on this side, we have basically similar IDs. And that is incorrect. We shouldn't be like using similar IDs on the page because the behavior is completely unpredictable. For example, I tried to do query selector on these IDs and it produces two results, which is something you don't expect. So I thought maybe we should build up on a proper foundation for this one. And I kind of hacked a structure how it could look like. So previously it was using file hash, line number on the left side and line number on the right side to create an ID for the line. Now it will be using file hash, but we'll be having side identifier in the ID and line number. And that basically gives a unique ID for each line on every side. So left side gets their own IDs, right side gets their own IDs as well, and they never conflict with each other, which basically solves the problem. But unfortunately, we are using these IDs to attach discussions, as far as I know. So we'll still have to use legacy IDs to attach the discussions anyway. And maybe eventually we get rid of it. But for now, I think we should be using proper IDs from the ground up and kind of push it forward so we change the way how we attach discussions in the future. And I wanted to share that with you. Maybe you have any thoughts on this. Does it make sense? Maybe some suggestions? What do you think? And I see Thomas already have some ideas.
Yeah, just a couple of random things. First of all, in the past, this should have been a single container around the left and right sides. And then when we switched from inline to parallel, it was just rearranging like the container elements from being like inline to being side by side. So it's interesting, or it's weird that it's now on both sides. It should have just been on one container. Doesn't change the fact that it is that way now. So we have to fix that. The other one is maybe a little bit more pertinent. I've been pushing for unique IDs for lots of stuff for a long time. And one of the reasons is that that file hash value can be non-unique in NMR. There are complicated scenarios where like if you have committed a symlink and then delete the symlink and replace it with a file of the same name, the file hash will be identical because the content of the file has not changed because the symlink points to the same file. But it will show as a delete of one file and an add of a file with an identical file hash. So that was a problem in the past that we never solved because we don't have unique IDs. And I'm just wondering if we're changing IDs, if we should solve the problem at the very core where we don't use file hash anymore.
I agree 100% with this because file hash simply uses file path. It doesn't use anything else. It doesn't use checks like modified attributes of the file. Like, is it deleted? Is it removed? Is it added? Like it's not considered. So yeah, I think it also makes sense to create more unique IDs, truly unique IDs, and dropping file hash completely. I think
so the question then, that's the question then goes to Gavin of like, how do we because right now we're generating these IDs sort of based on the Git diff, which is easy to do on the fly. You don't have to store anything, that kind of stuff. Um, we could continue doing that, just using more values for uniqueness. On the front end in the past, I've generated IDs for that little viewed checkbox. Like when you click viewed, then if the file changes in any future version, it becomes unviewed because using enough unique values, when something changes, it tweaks. So I think that there is a set of values in any given diff file that is unique enough to generate IDs. Of course, the alternative is just store one, store one per file per version, but that would be um, hard, I think, and a lot of like database queries for every MR version. Um,
It
so what
will
do you
work
think
for
about this?
merge requests. Like the suggestion with storing this stuff in the database, like it's already stored in the database for merge requests, so we can actually use
Mm,
real database IDs in our code, and there's like it can work. The problem is that it also should work for commits and compare views, which don't store anything in the database. It goes straight up from
right.
Italy, and we have to consider that. So file path, I think, is our only way to calculate this, but it also should include all the attributes that are modified and other
Yeah.
stuff that can affect how the file is presented.
It's also possible, sorry to jump in, Gavin, I'm sure you have thoughts. It's also possible that these IDs, even if you use all the unique values from a given blob, like a given Git diff, it's possible that they'll conflict across projects because you could have like an identical file with identical changes in different files. And I feel like IDs should never have those conflicts like across projects, just in case, or with the idea of potentially offline ability for our application. Um, if we're going to be like caching IDs or caching diff files, we need to have that unique ID, make sure that it does never conflicts across projects because we could store multiple projects in the browser. Anyway, back to you, Gavin. I'm sure you've got thoughts.
I don't have a I don't have an easy solution to that. Like it's a tricky problem, as we know. And yeah, so like we grab the hash from Gitaly, I guess, and that's kind of what we've been using, and we don't have an ID in the database in this context for commits, right? But we do have it for merge requests, isn't that right? So we have the diff in the database for the merge request, and we use it in the merge request context. Is that right, Stanislav?
Honestly, I don't remember.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, maybe something I can look into offline. But yeah, I think it's possibly going to be quite a big task to have a kind of a database ID for every single diff in the commit view change. But I'd have to look into it to understand it. So, but yeah, I understand the problems. I see that you get this stuff quite a lot in a different part of the source code with hashes and retrieving hashes and tags. Then they get confused with branch names, things like that. So yeah, we've seen this a lot in the past. Blob IDs or similar problem. And we've always kind of worked around it. So I'm not too sure if this case is going to be any different either, to be perfectly honest.
There was also one case that we kind of got beaten by when I was working on a pinned file. We actually had to use a unique identifier, and it was a surprise to me that Diffs actually don't store this identifier anywhere. It's always calculated in runtime. So in order to get a pinned file, what you have to do is basically fetch everything, calculate this unique ID for every single diff, and only then you can display your pinned file, which should be the first file in the merge request, which is a totally huge waste of resources, right? And it kind of defeats the purpose because you want to fetch the file first and just skip the rest. So I wonder if there's a way to also make Gitly work with this. So we could pass some kind of I don't know, maybe short way of describing path to the file, or even compressing this path. I don't know. I only know that GitLab supports fetching diff by providing just the path to the file, which is good. But I don't think it's a good idea to use the path as is as a kind of identifier, because it will get large pretty quick. Yeah, I'm open to any ideas about this.
Stanislav, I think if you're referring to the only unique ID that I know of on the front end, that's the one that I added to diff files for the view checkbox that's computed on the fly on the front end. And the reason that it's only on the front end is because we've had these conversations before, and from the back end perspective, they were like, we don't have anything unique.
Yeah.
So that was my kind of my point earlier to Gavin. There is a set of unique values that we're using on the front end to generate these IDs. It's standard UUID, like hash generation. And I wonder if we could just move that to the back end so that both of us are aware of like the same ID, and try that for a minute. I don't know what it would break to do that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, again, might need to look into that or do a proof of concept on that or something to get my head around that. So I guess you're combining a whole load of elements of the diff and then you're plugging it into like some sort of hash and
Yes.
then coming out with an ID.
Yeah, and the one to Stanislav's earlier point, it does use no, I guess it does use the MRID, and so that would not it would not be it would not work for commits, and so we might have to just take the MRID out. Maybe it's still unique enough with that gone. I'm not sure about that. Um, but yeah, it uses like the organization, the namespace, the project ID, the MRID, blob, the Git blob ID, and a bunch of other stuff to like make sure that we're referring to the exact same version of the exact same file. Um, but yeah, if you want, I can show you that offline sometime or whatever you want to do. So
Yeah, let me yeah, maybe that could be good. And then yeah, I guess that seems to make sense, right? If we were generating that on the fly and then passing that through to you guys, and then at least then it would be consistent and not something, it would be done in a more in a better place, I guess. But let me ask the team, or maybe I'll speak to Vasily about what he thinks about um global IDs like this
sure.
or
I'm
diffs.
also kind of open to the idea of using different IDs for different pages. So commits page and compare revisions page, it doesn't have linked file feature. So it kind of doesn't need this to be stored anywhere. So we can use whatever we want. And for Mars, we use a perfectly optimized version because we store everything in the database, and we can actually store this stuff like the IDs on the table and just query by that ID, which will be significantly faster than fetching the whole thing. So I'm kind of interested if using different IDs for different pages makes sense, because like storing ID in a database is straightforward. You don't have to think about it. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I'm also open to that as long as we're not hamstringing, um, the commit page or source code or whatever, by any choices that we make. Then yeah, I'm not using the same IDs seems fine as long as it works for their like trajectory.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I'll speak to some of my other team members and think about this, and then maybe Thomas, I might ping you on Slack, and we can just have a look at it and make sure that I understand what we're talking about correctly as well.
Sure.
Yeah, if you can share your thoughts on the linked issue, please do. I think Patrick is also kind of evaluating the idea of this, so we can come up with a solution that works on every page. So yeah, that would be
Sure.
really helpful.
Yep.
All right, anything else? Then let's have our 10 minutes back. Nice to see you. Thank you for the discussion, and see you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, see you next
Thank
time.
you. Thank you.
Bye.